What's the scoop with gabapentin Jr.?
Find out today on Medical History Mysteries.
Welcome to another week of Medical History Mysteries. I'm Pam Maragliano Muniz. With me, as always, Tom Viola. Tom, what's up?
Good to see you, Pam. How are you?
Oh my gosh, so good. It's interesting because we know, and we've talked about so many times, and we'll never be done talking about gabapentin, about its uses, its misuses, and what it could eventually lead to. But it sounds like there's a new kid on the block. Would you share what that's about?
Yeah, I don't know if this drug is really considered gabapentin Jr. And I have a long-standing history with gabapentin, having published that article back in 2018, which I still get hate mail for to this day. Um, this is Phenibut, and Phenibut is beta-phenyl-gamma-aminobutyric acid. It's similar to gabapentin, but it's certainly not the same. It was a product that was a neuropsychotic drug that was basically discovered and introduced into clinical practice in Russia in the 1960s, but it never made its way to the United States because it was never considered to be a drug that was worthy of the FDA's consideration. So it was never made legal here. And therefore, any Phenibut that's in the United States is technically illegal. Yeah, good luck with that because, everything finds its way to the US eventually because this is the biggest market to sell illicit drugs in. It has anxiolytic activity, but it also has what's known as neurotropic effects, which means it enhances cognition. And that's unusual because you don't normally find drugs that have an anxiolytic effect that also boost cognition. So we say it's GABA mimetic, meaning it promotes the effects of GABA in your brain, but at the same time, it stimulates dopamine, it stimulates other receptors in the brain and antagonizes yet other receptors in the brain, specifically phenylethylamine receptors. And ultimately, what that does is produce this mixture of I'm in a good space, I'm not anxious, I'm clear, I'm alert, I'm more receptive to people and to suggestions, and so that may be a good thing if that's what you're looking for. But of course, because of those effects, because we're boosting things like dopamine and boosting GABA, it leaves people sort of euphoric, and it leads them to be a little more open to suggestion. And that's why a drug like this one could also be used illicitly and perhaps even as a predatory drug. So it's an interesting drug by any means, okay? It's certainly used and abused, as I like to say, although I don't like the word abused because sometimes, you don't really know if who's abusing who. Is the drug abusing the person or is the person abusing the drug, as I like to say. But the bottom line is it's a drug that can be used both licitly and illicitly, even though technically it's illegal in the US anyway. And that's why I worry about this drug because I worry about all of these drugs that fly under the radar. There are some other examples of this. I think we may have spoken about them in the past, things like the nitazenes and things like tianeptine, what we call gas station heroin, which sort of flew under the radar for years and years now because they were developed in the 50s and 60s, put on somebody's shelf as, hey, that's too addictive. It's not going to make it to market. It's there's no clinical background to it. And then someone comes along and discovers them and reintroduces them into the so-called black market. And that's where these drugs become popular yet again. What that means for us dental professionals is that people could be taking these drugs. The fact that they're either illegal drugs or at least being used illicitly means, heck, I'm not going to tell you I'm using them, but yet they'll still have the effects on physiology and psychology like an anxiolytic drug, like a drug that boosts dopamine, like a drug that can cause euphoria. And so again, we're handed this witch's brew of things people could be taking at any one time. And I used to think I was a little bit paranoid about this and thought, oh, maybe I'm making too much of it. And then I read that article that I'm sure a lot of our listeners read, where so many middle-aged men and women are using kratom now. Kratom, that basically that tree that grows in a rainforest, which was, not technically illegal here in the US, was brought here. People grow kratom plants in their homes and use kratom. Not only do they use kratom, they mix it with drugs like phenibut and make what they call a stack. And I'm just surprised that and sort of shocked that all this time I thought I was wrong, but synthetic opioids have really become entrenched in the US and we just don't know about it. There's a complete lack of awareness, which is why I'm glad we're talking about it.
Wow. Okay. So are there other names for Phenibut that people might not be aware of unless they hear it?
Right now, no, but again, I don't know everything that I don't know about social media and influencers. I do know that, I've heard that it's called gabapentin Junior, but I couldn't tell you if that lasted a week or 6 months. I don't know. Every time there's a new name for a drug, I'm usually the last one to find out about it, and they've moved on to another name already because you got to be in that market. But I will say that Phenibut is not something that people would be necessarily familiar with. I don't think anybody would say Phenibut. They might call it something else, but it just leads to having an open and frank conversation with your patient about everything they're using. And, basically reassuring them, hey, I'm not the police, I'm not the DEA, it stays between us, but I do need to know everything you're using because anything you use can have an impact on anything I'm going to use to render dental care today. And that can harm you. And I don't want to cause you any harm.
Absolutely not. And it's a great reminder to us that if you don't know the name of the drug, take the 2 minutes to go to Dr. Google and find out what it's about. So
Yeah.
let's talk for a second about kratom.
So kratom is a plant that you can grow, right? The leaves from which you're going to grind up and use in multiple ways. It is both a stimulant and an opioid. So it interacts with some receptors that have a stimulant effect, but also interacts with other receptors that have an opioid-like effect. And people use it again to treat pain, to take the edge off, so to speak, and to make them more clear and more aware of their surroundings. And to them, that's the golden goose. That's the perfect blend of everything I need, especially if you've been cut off from opioids. Your doctor said, hey, no more, but you've got chronic pain. You've tried everything else and nothing works, even gabapentin, and it didn't work. Or perhaps, maybe it's a substitute for an opioid you would get using illicitly, but now can no longer have access to. And why not grow your own? My biggest problem with kratom is because it's a tropical rainforest tree, the place it grows best is warm, dark, um, moist places in your home, typically people's basements. Well, guess what? Other things grow in more moist, dark, and warm places like mold. And so a lot of people end up getting their plants contaminated with mold spores and then inadvertently inoculate themselves with those spores by consuming the plant material that's, become infested with that mold.
Is this a drug that turns up in routine screenings? You know how people do drug screenings as background checks or anything else? Are they testing for this?
Took the words out of my mouth, man, because the last thing we should talk about is what makes these drugs so darn popular. Yes, it's the sort of illicit nature, and yes, it's the sort of grow your own mentality. But not every drug test is sensitive enough to determine or find some of these substances. So imagine, if you're flying under the radar here using these substances, your employer doesn't know, nobody knows, not even your loved ones know you're using it, if you're good at concealing it. So that just concerns me because I could be working right alongside you, right next to you in a dental office. You could be under the influence. I wouldn't know it. And maybe you're not just working alongside me. Maybe you're the person that's operating that forklift, driving that truck, working that piece of machinery. And I'm counting on you to follow safety protocols, but you're under the influence and no one knows about it because it's not showing up on any drug test yet. That's what I think the concern is for lots of these substances. And I think ultimately that's why we have to be as dental professionals one step ahead and ask those tough questions to find out because we don't want to treat patients who are under the influence of any substance.
So, in the spirit of not being a downer, because I feel like a lot of our stories could always take a negative turn, one of the great things about all of these new drugs that turn up all the time is that we get to continue to share this with the dental community every single week. So, positive there is that it allows us to bring new information to you straight off the street. So, all right, I don't want to thank these drugs for hitting the market, but I'm grateful that we're able to share that information with our colleagues.
Same here, Pam, and thank you for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure working with you.
Pleasure's mine. All right, everybody, for Medical History Mysteries, don't forget, look up these drugs. If they turn up in your practice, you will not get a comprehensive account of everything in a short Medical History Mysteries segment. So look it up, and we can't wait to see you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.